Okay, so we have a panel with us here today, and they are going to answer questions for us on parenting. So you're welcome to text your questions to me. My number is on the screen right now, 780-262-0940. So let me introduce our panel to you. So on my far right here is Steve and Michelle Harder. They have 4 kids and 2 grandkids. And so they bring the voice of experience for sure. They have been part of our church for a number of years. Their kids all grew up here in church, and so we are glad to have them with us. And then we have Jessalyn Jones, and she's married to Brad, who couldn't be with us today, but you have 3 kids, is that right? 3, and what are their ages?
I have a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a almost 2-year-old.
Okay. Great. And then we have Rodney Cornelson, and he's married to Pearl. They're also part of our church family here, and they have 4 kids. Tell us the ages of your kids.
18, 10, 4, and 3.
Okay, so there's quite an age span there. And that's not untypical nowadays, as your family is a blended family, which is a very common thing nowadays. And so if you are a blended parent, please feel free to connect with us if you have questions. Blended parenting is very, very challenging. So we want to be mindful of that. And certainly if you have questions, let us know. So my first question here this morning is there a time when you are to stop being a parent as your child becomes an adult? And do you start allowing them to be more of an equal to you at that point? So I'm going to direct that to Steve and Michelle and see what you have to tell us on that.
No, you never stop being a parent.
Okay.
Your role changes a little bit as they grow and get older and become adults. I really struggle with the statement about becoming an equal, because as you become an adult, you take on different responsibilities, adult responsibilities that you don't have as a child when they're at home with you. But being a parent, you're always a parent. Your kids, as long as you have a relationship with them, even when they're adults, they'll still come back to you for advice, and ultimately the decision is theirs, but they're still going to come back to you as a parent and ask for advice.
Okay. Michelle, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree with my husband, because that's the right thing to do. But I do think that, yeah, you're always a parent, but my kids became intellectual equals when they were in high school.
Okay.
Math changed and got really hard. But, I mean, there's a lot that I can learn from them and a lot that they learn from us. So we're still parents, but we're definitely equals and friends. Mm-hmm. You know, we grow in that. And, yeah, they still come for advice. I'm not sure it's always good advice, but.
Okay. Yeah, great. Well, the next question here is, how do you evaluate whether a certain type of discipline is effective with an individual child or not? And how long do you keep trying to use it before you change your approach if it doesn't seem to be working? So, Jessalyn, why don't you kick us off on that one?
I think before you go with answering that question, you have to make sure that your children are aware of their expectations, that you for what is right and what is wrong, and that you are consistent in your discipline. Because if you're not consistent, and if your husband or partner is not on the same page, it's not going to be effective, and you're not going to be able to measure whether it's effective or not. And so as long as you guys are, to the best of your ability, on the same page, and are consistent and have the boundaries set up, and children aware of what is right and what is wrong, then you can kind of go from there. But it's always changing too, because it might work one time, and then it might not work, and then the punishment that you used the one time all of a sudden works again. So you have to be flexible and adaptable.
Okay. So how do you know whether a discipline is effective or not?
If you see them responding to the discipline and changing their behavior and following that path.
Okay. So basically you're looking for change.
Yeah, and so that they don't repeat the behavior.
Right. And so, Rodney, at what point do you kind of tell yourself, okay, this is not working. We need to go to plan B?
Well, I'm not sure if there's a set number of times, but I think we, to kind of add to what you said there, if you're not seeing a change, like I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 times or whatever, you give it a try, and you know, if nothing is happening, if nothing is changing, or if the threat of that discipline is not evoking a response, then chances are it's not being effective. It's not, you know, enough, or it's not the right one. That's what I would say to that. Also, it changes. Like for my 3 and 4 year old, you know, kids at that age have a very fine-tuned memory loss, and it's very easy for them to forget what they did and forget that it was wrong, and so you might end up, you know, with the kid doing the same thing 100 times a day. So a lot of patience is involved when they're that young. I would say, as far as a set amount of times before you kind of figure out if it's effective or not, works more with the older children.
Okay.
In their teens, or say, for example, your kid is coming home late. You know, you have a curfew and they're coming home late, so you try one thing and you try it, you know, a couple of times, you know, 5 or 10 times or whatever, and if it's just not working, they're still doing it, then chances are it's not effective.
Okay. For us, I mean, our children responded very differently to discipline. I mean, we had one child who was extremely sensitive, and, you know, you almost just needed to kind of look at them a little bit, you know, tilt your head a little bit, and they were right away apologizing. And then there were we had other children who were much more stubborn, and they were going to do what they wanted to do no matter what. Is that a common phenomenon in families, or was our family kind of weird?
Yeah, I think everybody goes through that.
Yeah.
I know in my family, I'd say if you have more than one kid, you're probably going through that. Yeah, we have the same issue. I would say we probably would all agree on that.
To add to that, I think one thing that's important is to know each child. Make sure you take special time to spend with them so that you have a sense of what will work for them. And yes, it is going to be different, because I do have a sensitive kid too, where all you have to do is look at them and they're in tears running off to their bedroom. So obviously I'm not going to use the same discipline that I use on my middle child as I would on my older child, who's much more confident.
Okay. Good.
When that gets really challenging is when they all get in trouble together. And you can't discipline them all the same way. You know,
Right.
if it's a consequence, you know, if they all, let's say they all went and graffitied the park, that's a lot easier because you can apply that, okay, now you're going to clean it up. But when it's, you know, something different where you have to discipline them, and you can't discipline them the same because then they're all, you know, that's not fair. But it gets really challenging that way.
So that raises a really interesting question now. How do you deal with the fairness thing? Like, we ran into this, hey, that's not fair, you know, you treated him differently than me, or you know, they get away with all kinds of things that we never got away with, or whatever. How do you deal with that? Jessalyn, how would you respond to a question like that?
I haven't had to deal with it a whole lot because my kids are still younger, so they haven't really come to that conclusion. But I think open communication, what I have had to deal with is the older one, is like when we use chores for discipline, they're wondering, why doesn't Gideon have to do this chore? And it's just, you know, you sit with them and say, well, Gideon is 4, you are 7. And you know, you list why he's able to do that and why it wouldn't work for Gideon. And sometimes he'll bring in Evie, and I'm like, okay, Evie is 2. Her mental capacity is not there, you know, and so as long as you are open and take the time to communicate with them, they should hopefully be able to see it from a better point of view and not feel like they're being unfair, or that you're being unfair to them, or they're not being treated right.
I'm curious if any of you have ever taken the tack with your kids where you explain to them that fairness is not necessarily a goal here. Like, life is not fair, and so we're just trying to grow, all of us together. So I see some nodding over here.
I don't know if I really have fairness. Yeah, you're right. Life is not fair, and they're going to learn that very quickly. And that is parenting, is preparing them for when they get out from underneath your roof. When it comes to things like discipline, I was terrible at it. And more often than not, I reinforced what she said, and that was very important. One thing I tried not to do is to discipline out of anger.
Right.
Always wait. Having said that, our son, you know, each one of your kids are going to learn how to push your buttons. My girls, I'll admit, had me wrapped around their finger, and I had trouble. But when it came time to discipline, do it out of love. Everything out of love and nothing out of anger.
Right.
And when they're pushing your buttons, it's a hard thing not to do, is to react out of anger. Sometimes it's good to step back, send them to the room, and think about it, calm down, and then administer whatever discipline you think is appropriate.
Right.
Anger is never a good thing.
Yeah.
When it comes to the fairness issue, I used to say all the time, if life was fair, Jesus wouldn't have had to die for our sins. And the excuses for us, or for me, the goal of parenting was to prepare them for life. And so in our home, things weren't fair, but we tried to make them equal. So the difference would be like you have 3 kids trying to watch a baseball game over a fence. Fair is giving everybody 2 boxes to stand on, when maybe the tallest kid doesn't need a box because he can see over the fence. The shorter kid might need 2 boxes, and then one kid might need 1 box. So
Right.
it's equal, but it's not fair.
Right.
And that's not wrong. So I don't know if that helps at all.
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. So here's a question that just came in. How do you have margin in your life when you have a busy family? How do you balance God, spouse, kids, work, house maintenance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So Rodney, why don't you lead us off on that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll take the easy one. That's that is the question right there that I'm struggling with right now. the most. How do you balance everything? It's tough. There's no doubt. It's very tough. One thing my wife always says is priorities. Figure out what's the most important.
Mm-hmm.
Make a list. Number 1, number 2, number 3. My list would look something like God number 1, spouse number 2, kids number 3, job kind of comes in there. It's a tricky balance. I would say maybe something that has really helped me is to have grace with yourself. If you mess it up, we're all prone to just beating ourselves up. But then, do whatever you have to do. Make a schedule if you have to, even a daily schedule. You wake up at this time, and the first thing you do is your devotions and pray and spend that time with God, and then hang out with your spouse and then as in my family, me and Pearl wake up first usually. So we get to, even if you spend that time with God with your spouse together first, that's awesome. Yep. Actually. And then spend that time with your spouse, and then your kids wake up, and then you spend that time with them, and the trouble is where you wake up at 4 a.m. and go to work, and especially if you're not a morning person, then where do you fit that time in with God? But
Right.
Yeah, you just got to live on purpose, I guess. Just really.
Good.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to take a stab at that one?
I think another thing would be, I know nowadays we live in a world where social media is so, you can't get away from it, and there's so much comparisons. You see pictures of this person doing beautiful home renos, this person, going here and here and here with your kids, and you're like, oh, where do they get the energy? For myself, I had to step back from Facebook and those social media outlets because I was getting to the point where I was feeling overwhelmed and it was just too much. And it took away from everything else. So I think that is a huge, huge issue that especially young parents that have grown up with technology face. You can't really get away with it, so it's up to you to limit your time on it. Right. And not look at what everyone else is doing. I know, for housework and keeping a clean house with 3 kids is for me incredibly difficult. And then we have animals on top of that. And so and then all of a sudden you have guests coming over and it's like, oh, do the panic clean. And so, it's kind of like, no, you came here to see me, not my house. And just, what people post online is not necessarily what it is day-to-day life, and it's sometimes hard to see, but I think that is another issue, is just the comparison thing.
Yeah. I think that's huge. There's such a big trap there with comparison, isn't there? So here's another one that came in. What should we do if we see things kids do wrong, wanting to correct them, but they actually learn from watching us?
Stop doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, them learning from watching us is so true.
Yeah.
Now that my kids are gone, and even having said that, I find myself a lot like my parents. So without even knowing it, I watch my parents because I end up becoming almost a product of what they are, different. And my kids are going to be the same way.
Right.
Growing up, watching them, you think, man, they're not acting anything like me. But more and more, they're going to become a product of how you've raised them and the principles that you've raised them with. I wish each one of them would have shown up with an instruction manual because it would have made it so much easier.
Right.
But it doesn't. So, and even having said that, you pray for them.
Right.
That's probably the biggest thing that you can do, because when they leave, that's all you have is to pray for them, and you're hoping that you raised them right.
Right.
And they always come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just a follow-up question to that. I mean, I think your answer is absolutely correct that we parent more by modeling than we do by actually talking. But is there a place for sitting down with your child and admitting that the way you are acting or have acted was not right? And is that effective?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think so for sure. I make so many mistakes, like overreacting. And, you know, when Graham, we had an incident where he got his head stuck in, he was climbing a tree and he fell and he got his head stuck in there. And, you know, at first it's kind of funny. And then the realization that he was stuck good. And we're in the middle of the bush. It was just me and my 3 kids. And my daughter's crying because she's had enough. And so then I'm starting to lose it and say things that I regret and overreact. And finally I managed to climb up and pull him out. But it was probably half an hour process. And in that time I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to phone my father-in-law to come get a chainsaw and cut this kid out of here because it's wedged in between 2 trees. So I said a bunch of things that I regretted. And, you know, and I was causing his panic to build up too. But thankfully, I was able to get him out, pull him out, and the first thing I said, or not the first thing, after I'd calmed down a little bit, I said, you know, Graham, I'm so sorry, I overreacted. I was scared. And, you know, rather than just stay angry and head home and not fix the situation, I took that time and I apologized and said, I made a mistake.
Right.
And now it's a funny story. But it wasn't funny at the time.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another question that just came in. How can you ensure that your kids want to spend time with you when they grow up? So I'll ask Steve and Michelle first, because your kids are grown.
How can you ensure that they want to spend time with you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, usually you are on the same page with them on what they enjoy. Each kid is different, and some like sports, some like reading, but you got to get involved in what they like, not necessarily what you like.
Okay.
Having said that, just being up here just is really overwhelming a little bit because it's not that I know everything about parenting. I really feel, and just like having kids, you wish you knew a lot more, and we're learning as we go.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I think that I've learned is that spend time with them when you have them, because those are the things that you remember.
Yeah.
One thing that can reinforce them too is spending time with your spouse and having a solid relationship there, because that's probably one of the most important things that will influence how they grow up.
Right.
Yeah. Stability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want your kids to spend time with you when they're older, spend time with them when they're younger. And the only reason we got into motorcycles was because Devin bought a motorcycle when he was 16. Now he doesn't even ride.
Okay.
But yeah, and you know, we got our kids when Steve said about having a relationship with your spouse. I got the kids involved in planning date nights and that kind of thing at home because they were little, so we couldn't really go out and we couldn't afford babysitters. So, you know, they thought that was awesome, and they were, you know, in charge of being upstairs, and we would give them like chips and movies, and they would let us have our date time. So that was like another way to spend time with them and teaching them really great values when it comes to relationships and spouse.
Yeah.
We have it a little bit easy, I find, because our kids, I think all of their love language is time.
Okay.
So, and that's mine too, so that works great for me. So we
Sure.
hang out and we do stuff.
Okay. I, I heard a parent say a while ago that they had observed their child talking about the atmosphere in your home. Like they had, as they had grown older, they had noticed in other homes that there was a lot of bickering and stuff like that, and they didn't like that. And so they remarked about their own home that they were thankful that there was a nicer atmosphere in the home that they grew up in. And I wondered about if that influences kids wanting to come home once they are moved out or older, wanting to spend time with you. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. There's that that's that sense of what you want to come back to. It kind of plays on the homesick word. You grow up and you move out. I can speak for myself. But once the chaos of all of that initial, adulthood hitting you and things kind of start to settle down, you remember again what it was like when you were a kid. And you remember those feelings, you remember the atmosphere and the emotions, and I'd say absolutely that helps. You just are naturally drawn back again to go to mom and dad's house, and and especially if that atmosphere is still the same in
Right.
that house. Yeah, I think that makes a huge difference.
And that comes back to the whole thing of keeping your marriage strong, doesn't it? Because
Yeah, and it's cool when you're a place where the kids want to bring their friends too.
yeah,
I mean, and we weren't above bribing. We always had pizza and a big TV and stuff going on. And so the kids, they always brought their friends over. Our place was always packed when the kids were little. We would go to bed and just be like, let yourselves out.
yeah,
But it's nice to know where they are. I
right.
love that.
Yeah, well, that's good. So here's another question that just came in. How do you teach your kids to walk with God? So that's a pretty big question. Jessalyn, why don't you kick us off on that one?
I think the biggest thing is by modeling it. They watch you, and so if they see you following the habits, they're going to follow in step, like morning devotionals, reading the Bible together and doing stories, how you treat other people. When a question comes up that they might be curious, you take any opportunity you can to use it as a teaching example, because in the end they're gonna be watching you, and especially
Right.
when they're little, you're their person, you're who they follow and who they want to be, and so you have such influence over that.
Yeah, good. So, Rodney, here's a question I'd like to ask you. You're in a blended family. So what is the best way to ensure that you're on the same page, especially with parenting, before you make a long-term commitment to another person or to having a child, or to blend your family with that person?
I'd say communication. You have to know, right, what's on their mind. You have to know, what's important to them and what they feel are some of the major issues of parenting, what they feel are kind of maybe more minor issues, and you really have to talk it out, and again, maybe make a list of of the different areas of parenting, discipline, rewarding, schooling, and on and on. And no matter how major, no matter how minor, and then just go over each topic and see where you meet, where you have differed opinions, and then where you have differed opinions, you have to be ready and willing to compromise. Because obviously if you don't, you're just going to clash and everything is going to explode. But the minor issues are one thing I would like to say are the minor issues of parenting, or what we feel maybe are some of the less important issues of parenting, are just as important as the major ones, because there's a lot more of them. And if you don't talk about this sort of stuff before you head into it, then when it comes, it's going to overwhelm you. And even though it's a little thing, these little things are thousands a day or thousands a week,
Yeah.
and they'll, the Bible says it's the little foxes that spoil the vine. And
So I think what I'm hearing you say is you need to make sure you talk through absolutely as many what-if scenarios as you possibly can think of.
absolutely.
Okay. Well, here's another question. In a blended family, parenting each other's kids can be a challenge. How do you get over that? Like if you're a step parent, how do you navigate that?
Well, I guess it depends a bit on how old the kid is. How long they have been under the training of the other parent. Like I have a 10-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they're my wife's kids. I met the 18-year-old at 15. So at 15 years old, they've been under the training of somebody else already for, through all the most important training years of their life. Now, if you come in and start doing it your way, then it's not gonna be pretty. So I would say you have to be on the same page as their parent, and do it their parents' way, at least for the first little while.
Okay. So basically you're coming in there to support your spouse at that point.
Yeah.
As a step parent.
And it's also okay to, let the child know that you have your own way of doing things as well, but the enforcing of that needs to be much, much less the older they are.
Right. That's good advice. So here's one more question regarding blended families. As a church, how can we support blended families?
That's not sure if I really have an answer for that, because I've only been in it now for three years. But I would say, yeah, kind of the same thing. Like just be on the same page, as a parent. And chances are if you're going to that church, you're going there because you think the same and you believe the same. Just be that role model, for them, and then support the marriage. The kids, have all their own opinions and struggle with the fact that now they have a new dad or a new mom. So if they see everybody else around them supporting the fact that there's a new connection there, I think that would be a big thing.
Okay, good. Well, we've come to the end of our time, so I just want to give each of you a chance to respond to just briefly to this last question. So I'll start with you, Steve, and we'll just work our way across. I'm a brand new parent. Actually, we haven't even had our first child yet. We're just expecting our first child. What would you say is the number one thing that you would want to communicate to a young couple who are expecting their first child?
Just one thing?
Yeah.
Wow.
The most important thing.
The most important thing is pick your battles and spend as much time as you can with them.
Okay.
Take a breath, and don't feel like you have to give them as many experiences as possible while they're young and do every activity, because building relationships ultimately is preparing them for life too.
Right. Good.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you're going to be making lots of mistakes.
Right.
And just when you make the mistakes, go back and make them right. Admit that if you were wrong, because that's important, I think, for the kid to know that you're human too.
Okay. Very good.
Absolutely, I agree completely with that. Time is your most valuable possession besides your family. Of course, don't waste it. You know, that's that minute, that day, that hour that just passed. You're not going to get that back. That was your chance.
Right.
You know, so spend it wisely.
Right. Well, this has been very helpful. Thank you to all four of you for sharing with us your wisdom. Thank you for interacting with us and sending in your questions. I hope this was helpful for you as well. And I welcome you to send questions in the future. If you have other questions, we as a church are committed to being a place where families thrive. That's our core goal as a church. And so if you are looking for a place where you can find support and other families that are on the same journey as you, give us a call or check us out, and we would love to welcome you into our family.